All right. Well, welcome back to All Things Mortgage Related. I'm Joshua here, and we're doing a series on the process of getting a home, going from start to finish on getting a loan to buy a home. And we're doing a bunch of sub series right now underneath the pre approval, pre qualification process as far as how a lender looks at that to determine whether or not it's good for you to go start looking at homes and making offers. And in today's video, I want to talk a little bit about employment and work history. Again, a lot of confusion around this. I see a lot of clients sometimes disqualify themselves or some because they don't think they've been with their current employer long enough, and I got to be there for 2 years. And so we're going to talk about that. So it is true that an underwriter does want to look at the most recent 2 years work history to determine that your income is stable and likely to continue. So, I mean, if you've had a job and you have lots of gaps between jobs, and that can be an issue, especially if it's like more than 6 months. But you don't have to necessarily be with your current employer at all for 2 years. You can have been there just a week and it can still work. As long as when we look at your 2 year history, we can see that you're in the same relative field of work. Now, again, this can be a very kind of gray area because being a barista at Starbucks and then being a teller at Safeway, you might say, well, those aren't the same type of things, but it's a service industry, or we call it a labor industry, and you can see there's a correlation between that. So in general, what we're looking at is if you have a 2 year history and maybe you've had 3 different employers during the last 2 years, let's just say, for example, if you're in the same industry and your wages stay stable or even better yet, are increasing from employer to employer, then that can definitely work and you can go ahead and proceed. If you've been with one employer for like, say, I don't know, 5 years, and all of a sudden you got a promotion, somebody hired you on, same type of field or whatever, and you've been there for a week, well, as long as you have a signed offer letter and you're full time, then you're good to go. So let's talk about part-time work. One thing that can really trip people up is with part-time work, you do actually need to show some stability with the employer because every employer might work you different hours. And so it's considered much more risky or I would say not stable when it's part-time work. So if you go from a part-time at one employer and you move over to another employer, I'm not saying you can't do it, but it might be a little more difficult to document that the hours guaranteed by the new employer will be equal to or greater than where you're at with the last employer. But the other thing that can get people is when they go from full-time to part-time. So when you go from full-time, say you've been an employer for 5 years, and then all of a sudden you decide, you know what, I'm gonna go back to school, or maybe starting a family, and so I'm gonna stay home and kind of reduce my hours and be home with the kids more often. If you go from full-time to part-time, you've now kind of made it from stable to unstable. And even though you've been that employer for, say, 5 years, you will have to actually work at least a year to show how you're averaging on your income now that you're considered part-time. The other one would be going reverse. Let's just say you've been within multiple part-time jobs. You got hired on another job. You're part-time. You've been there for about 6 months, but all of a sudden they promoted you to full-time. Well, because now you've gone to full-time, that's considered stable. And again, as long as your past work history supports at least 2 years of working, even if it's part-time and now you're full-time, you would be able to use it. So as you can see, there's a lot around work history, and you don't want to disqualify yourself from buying a home on your own. So definitely make sure that if you're, this is why the pre-approval process is so important, not only to show you what you might be able to afford, but just to make sure that all these little tiny nuances are resolved so that when you get into the to contract and you're kind of going down the process, you won't be surprised by something unpleasant. So if you have any questions on this, feel free to message me down below. If you're finding this video helpful, hit subscribe, share it with somebody who you know might benefit from it, and I look forward to talking to you in the next video. All right, bye for now.